An Escape in Valladolid. Alright then, wait till I sit down with a bottle of water next to me like all orators do, number 6 said, and I'll tell you my tale. First of all, I'm going to tell you how I ended up being in a certain transfer, because that's what led to a series of strange circumstances. After the events in Alicante, I was held in Duraco for a month on special regime. Everything was pretty much the same, but I was in number 5, isolation unit. From there I was taken to a trial in Malaga by normal transfer. They took me in a van that was going to Barcelona. A friend of mine and I were on trial for possession of weapons, the ones we had on us when they arrested us in Valladolid. They were paranoid about me in Malaga and used oppressive tactics on me. In the end, well, it was like this. I had to wear prison uniform. I had no mattress, nothing at all in the cell. So as soon as I was allowed to go into the yard, I got up onto the roof and smashed everything in reach. Tiles, glass, etc. The picolotes were running around like mad. They gave me my things and I came down off the roof, almost straight into the van, taking me to Almeria. I was in the dangerous ward for 10 days, and as they didn't even want me there, I was transferred to Granada. I was there for another 10 days. It was freezing cold with snow and everything. I caught something incredible. I don't know, pneumonia or something like that. It was tough, real tough. The thing was, there was no pane in the window, and the toilet was next to it. To give you an idea, one night I got up to piss, when you're nice and warm in bed but are dying to piss, and I collapsed in 2 minutes flat. Well, when I got ill and in a really bad state, they moved me back to transfers in Mico, with the intention to take me on to Duraco. They kept me in Mico for 3 or 4 days, and by chance Tapia was there. I hadn't seen him for ages. We had been together in the Canary Islands for nearly a year. I felt lousy, really shit. I could hardly breathe, especially when I lay down. I had to sleep almost sitting up and breathe very slowly, and I was put in transfer in these conditions. I thought I'd be moved to Duraco on Tuesday in the Barcelona van, but early on Monday they told me that I had to go to Pamplona for a trial. In the cells outside I saw the Frenchmen and Campillo, who were the only ones I knew. And only by sight, as they say. I went to a trial in Duraco once with the Frenchmen, that's all. All the others were Category C prisoners going to Burgos or Nanclares. I left my rucksack in the boot and got into the cage with a boy. I don't even remember who he was. They put us on the left side in about the 4th cell from the front. As soon as I sat down while I was arranging my bag with water and a sandwich, I looked down and noticed there was a ray of sunlight on the floor, going from the door to the wall. The boot was open, so you could see the light perfectly. I soon worked it out. Either this is the joint between 2 bars and what I can see is the space between them, or there's no welding here. I stamped my feet on the floor a few times in different spots, pushing hard in the center, and it gave slightly, bending about 2 or 3 centimeters. Good, I said to myself, and started chatting with my cellmate. I could see the strip of light on the floor right until they closed the boot just before we left, so I suppose there weren't many rucksacks in that spot. In fact, as we found out later, the left half of the van was empty. That was strange, as I knew it was usually packed and the rucksacks had to be kicked in. So we set off from Mecca. None of us had handcuffs on because the picolotes had taken them off when we got into the van. We hadn't even left Madrid when I heard the Frenchman, who was a couple of cages behind me, pulling the leg of the seat off. It was the back leg, to be exact, and he was smashing the floor with it. I think he was Campino. I called him and said to stop, go into the corridor, and come up to my cell. He carried on working. I insisted, and when they opened the doors, I spoke to him. Look, there's no welding here, I said, so this is already done right across. If the door part is all right, we'll only need to do about a foot, and look, it's rusted. If we have to saw it, we won't make it. I've tried during other transfers, and it's impossible to cut through the plate. It was true, the patch next to the door was worn by water dropping from the bottles. At first you couldn't see it very well because you needed to remove the panel made of wood, or formica, like bus seats that covered the floor. The Frenchman told me that he had come from Daroca in the same van and that they had an argument with the cops because they tried to work on the floor of the corridor. They had taken off a piece of paneling in the rear, but the Picos went mad and they couldn't carry on because they'd been caught right in the middle of the job. The cops were angry because 3 or 4 cages were open and the people in the corridor were blocking their view. That's why they stuck to the back grate. As it was impossible to work in these conditions, I did this. I left the Frenchman alone to work in my cell and told everyone to go back into the cells and close the doors to leave the corridor free. I went to the back to the toilet area and started looking at the view through the grate of the door. I told the cops I was feeling sick. As they could see me and saw that the corridor was empty, the Picos relaxed and sat down. All this time, and the Frenchman was working like a beast. He only had the leg of the seat, but when he pulled it out by moving it backward and forward, it got thin and flat at one end like a crowbar. The base of the seat was made of plywood, so it was not very hard, but he made a huge din all the same when he pulled the pieces out. There were a few spliffs going around, and we asked the gypsies and other flamenco aficionados to sing a bit to hide the noise. Everything was going fine because you should have seen how this Frenchman worked. He looked like he was fighting with the van. After a bit, I went to see how things were going, and our friend had almost removed the whole panel. People went into the corridor again to cover us because the area we were working on was near the door, and the Frenchman was over 1.90 meters and hardly fitted inside the cage. So I had to stand in the corridor. When we came to the metal sheet and took all the shit off of it, there was a layer of mud and grease. We saw that there was no welding at all from the door to the wall, and that in the door area of about 30 centimeters, it was rusty. So we stood up and started stamping in the corner with all our might, the Frenchman on the plate and me with one foot in the corridor. Suddenly the Frenchman went through, grabbing hold of me in the seats. The floor had opened like a tin of sardines. We folded the corner down, and a perfect hole resulted in the form of a triangle, so wide that the Frenchman went through down to his waist and bent to check the depth of the cavity. If there had been any rucksacks there, it would have been a problem to fold the plate down. We'd have had to move them all out and put them in one of the cages. But as I had imagined, the part was completely empty. Everything was going great. We saw that it was easy to open the door of the boot from the inside. All we had to do was relax and wait for the right moment to jump. We'd done the job in record time, as we must have been near Guadarrama, more or less. Now we had to decide about the right place to jump out, and obviously, who was going to come with the Frenchman and me. Campillo had volunteered from the start, you might say. And another guy came and asked if he could come with us. I didn't know him. He was about 30 years old and had a beard. I asked him his name, and he said Vasquez. He was from Huelva. I also wanted to know why he was inside. He said he'd robbed some banks and got nicked. Good, or rather great, one more. Later, Vasquez asked everybody in the van, cell by cell, if anybody wanted to jump. We wanted as many people as possible to jump. That way we would have a better chance. Nobody else wanted to join us. Well, as you know, the van was going to Burgos and stopped first in Segovia, then in Valladolid, and every now and again in Palencia. We had to find out if it was going to stop in Segovia, because in that case we'd have to jump there or never. I didn't like the idea because Segovia is a small town with very few exit roads. I preferred Valladolid, which was bigger, and also it was my territory. So I went up and down the van asking them all if anybody was getting off at Segovia. It seemed like nobody was. Then we wondered if it might be stopping to pick someone up, and it was impossible to guess that. A guy, one of the prisoners, solved the problem. He was great. He went to the door at the front and said to the picolota, "Hey, boss, we're stopping in Segovia to pick up my brother-in-law who's coming in with me to the trial in Burgos, right?" The picolota told him we wouldn't be stopping in Segovia. Our friend insisted, "Yes, we are, boss. My brother-in-law has to come with me." The pico got annoyed and said, "I know better than you where we're stopping." The guy was magnificent. He did a great job. Now we knew we needed to know. Okay, direct to Pucelea. Well, you know Villa Nubla is on the way to Leon, about 50 or 20 kilometers from Valladolid. So the van would enter from the south and go through the town center. That would be our chance. As we still had plenty of time, I imagine each one spent it thinking about what he would do next. I mean, the moves needed to escape the siege if everything went according to plan. Now, I remember that spliffs were being passed around the van. I didn't smoke because I was fucked, and in any way we needed all our strength to succeed. The Frenchman didn't seem to care much about that, as he had more than one spliff. I did a round to try to get some money. You can't imagine how tense I was. They passed me 2,000 pesetas, just enough for immediate necessities. Then I talked a little with Vasquez. He said he would try to quickly nick a car and get out of Valladolid full speed ahead. I warned them how I'd be going. I'm well known here. As soon as everything kicks off, there'll be a right stir. I also suggested meeting up again later. A group of 2 or 3 had more resources than one man alone. And then I knew these places and they didn't. And most important of all, I knew people who could give us shelter. Vasquez carried on with his idea of taking a car and shooting off. The Frenchman and I agreed to meet in a big store, in the sports department to be precise. It was clear that first we'd have to run in different directions at top speed. Our only problem was the escort behind us, a Citroen or a Peugeot with 2 cops inside. The Frenchman even had the nerve to go down into the boot, find his rucksack, and put on a leather jacket. I gave him a telephone number he could reach me at if he had any problems, and he wrote it on the label of his jacket. Our great moment was near, and as we were approaching Pucela, we got ready and went down into the boot. We formed a row of 3 behind the door, the Frenchman, Vasquez, and myself. The Frenchman grabbed a handle on one side, and I grabbed the one on the other. All we had to do as open the door was to pull handles at the same time. We agreed to jump as soon as the van stopped at a traffic light. As we'd have to get out of the left side if the escort drew up alongside the van, the most logical thing at traffic lights, we'd be able to quietly walk away without them seeing us. The only person who would be able to see us was the driver, but he should be watching the traffic of the intersection. With this in mind, we put a guy above us to look through the holes of the window for us and let us know the direction we were headed in. As I knew the way into the town through Laguna de Dura perfectly, I asked him if he could see a lake, a petrol station, a river, factories, and so on. That way I always had a picture of where we were. We were all very tense. The guy above said we were going over a bridge. It was the entrance to the town. The van stopped at a traffic light right by the bridge. It was a shit of a place to jump because on one side there was just an industrial area with big empty roads, and on the other there were the barracks of the Guardia Civil a few blocks along. A fucking big barracks, the general command of Valladolid. Absolutely chock full of cops. Without asking me, the Frenchman opened the door and said, let's go now. I stopped him, holding him back, explaining that it was full of cops there. I just made it to stop him from jumping, but we couldn't close the door now and had to hold on to it. I kept looking out through a tiny crack. The main problem was that we were going along a straight road that cuts right through the town, and the van just slowed down at the 3 or 4 traffic lights it passed. And as you know, if you go through a green light or on a main road, the rest will all be green too. And son of a bitch, we got green lights all the way and were really furious. It was very dark and we couldn't see each other's faces. I can imagine what idiotic expressions we all had. Me for sure, because I knew that we'd be out of town in no time. We crossed Zorilla Boulevard and took Garcia Morado Bridge. There were only 2 possibilities left. One, that the bus would turn right towards the road to Salamanca, where we'd have a more chance to escape, and the other that it would go straight and take the new ring road to Leon. As I continued to check where we were headed through the gate, the Frenchman was making suggestions about the best position for jumping out of the moving van. The best thing in his opinion was to do it huddled up in fetal position. This guy's off his head, fleeted through my mind. Finally, as we were about to take the road to Salamanca, the van took the slip road and slowed right down. We were doing about 50 kilometers an hour, and without thinking twice, I shouted, "Now!" We opened the door wide and jumped. I landed on my feet, and as soon as I touched the ground, I fled, running. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone on my right rolling on the ground. Thank goodness the road curved to the right, and as we jumped left, the van catapulted us out. Otherwise, it would have been driven right over us. I headed in the opposite direction to the van. The area where we jumped out was not a very good spot. It was a residential suburb with many gardens and porches, so there was wide visibility. But anyway, I knew it well. The escort car came at me, and when I started running, I had to jump over the railing to avoid being hit. I ran like hell. The one who had been driving the car started running after me. About 150 meters on, I looked back and saw that the guy was still on my tracks. He was young, about 25 or 26 years old, and taller than me. How he ran, the bastard. I looked at him a couple of times and noticed he wasn't carrying his piece. As you know, the cops usually take their holster off and leave it on the dashboard on long journeys to be more comfortable. And as he'd set off at full speed, he'd left it there. So the cop was still on my tracks when I started to feel a pain in my chest and could hardly breathe. So I put my brain into action. First, as always, to avoid being shot, you run towards people, and I was running like mad on the pavement of a wide road. But when I saw the cop wasn't armed and that my strength was about to give up, I went in the direction of an area that is usually more or less deserted. If I was among people, I'd run the risk of somebody jumping on me or a police car appearing on the scene, so I decided to grapple him alone before completely out of breath. I headed towards the river behind the sports center. There was a yard there and no one in sight. I started to slow down, pretending I was tired, and the cop came closer. When we were next to a parked truck, he put a hand on my shoulder. For a second, I could see his triumphant expression as if he was saying, "I've got you." I stopped suddenly and pushed my right elbow back with all my might. I hit him in the pit of the stomach, and the air that came out of the picoletto passed by my ear in a flash. It went gush like a firecracker. I mean, my elbow nearly came out through his back. I turned and punched him a left and a right in the face, and he fell reventacus ye espermonacus, a legion expression, exhausted and in pieces. As he fell, he shouted, "Help! Help me!" I saw two guys get out of the lorry. They were construction workers in overalls and quite old, about 40 or 50. The cop was lying face down on the ground. I punched him hard on the nape of the neck twice, and the guy stayed on the ground, bending and stretching his leg, like epileptics do when they're having a fit. The workers just went back into the truck and shut the door. I ran fast towards the river. I was so tired that when I got to a stone wall that was up to my waist, I couldn't even jump over it. I just leant over it and let myself fall on the other side. I rolled down the small bank and got back up on my feet on a little dirt track that runs along the riverbank. Sporty people use it for jogging. I started running. I mean trotting, rather. I couldn't fucking make it, but I had to go along a little path bordering the river. I had no strength left, but I had to shift from there. Also, it was a beautiful day, and I was wearing a tracksuit with a thick lining, a mountaineering jacket, and basketball trainers. I was suffocating. I reached the bridge. I think it's called Isabel La Catolica, and under it 2 boys, schoolgirls aged about 16 or 17, were rolling a spliff. I joined them, and they sneaked a look at me. I started talking to them. "It's hot. Yes, it's a good day today. Look at that," I go, running with all this gear on, and now I'm boiling. Have you run far?" "I've come from the Division Azul Bridge." "Shit, then you have run a lot." And all that, here one of them passes me the spliff. I said no, I did smoke, but I was doing sport that day. I got my breath back a little sitting there with them, and after a bit asked them where I could find a taxi stop. They said there weren't any, but that a lot go over the bridge. They got up to go off, and I tagged along with them on the way up to get lost in the crowd more than anything. As soon as I got to the road, a taxi appeared. Look, if you'd seen how I hurled myself towards it, you wouldn't believe it. It took me to Plaza Mayor, and I went into a bar. I had a beer and made a couple of calls. They came in a car to get me and brought me sunglasses and a different colored jacket. They left me in a house with some food out of danger. I heard on the radio that 3 of us had managed to escape. Campillo, Vasquez, and me. The Frenchman was caught by the other picolota of the escort about 200 meters from the van. The guy had really bad luck after doing nearly all the work himself. Anyway, then during the night they nicked Campillo wandering around an industrial area in the outskirts. I don't know what he was doing there, but I suppose it was because he didn't know the area. Vasquez made it. He went into a neighborhood and managed to meet some people who left him outside the town a couple of days later. It's not so easy to find such great people, is it? As for me, I left Valladolid the following night, and they kept on looking for me there, even in the sewers. Well, that's all. Now it's your turn, Juan and Norman.